Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today we got another fun and exciting episode for you guys this evening because this week PowerPanda released F-Zero Vintage Velocity, which takes all of the tracks from the original Super Nintendo F-Zero game and imports them into the F-Zero Maximum Velocity engine. Previously, they took all of the Game Boy Advance tracks and put them in the Super Nintendo version, so this is the other side of the same coin. It is absolutely spectacular to see these fan games come through and provide all of us a little bit more fun. Now heads up at the start, I am not the best at F-Zero, so if I bump the wall a few too many times, you will know why. And before I get too far involved, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. But I absolutely love all the fan games we're getting in 2024. It feels like pretty much every other day somebody sends me a message or I see a tweet revealing that there's a brand new experience to be had, which is absolutely incredible. Just earlier this week I talked about the Contra Super Nintendo MSU1 port that we just got from Infidelity. But what PowerPanda has done here is imported all of the track layouts and all of the cups from the Super Nintendo version of F-Zero and brought them into the Maximum Velocity engine on the Game Boy Advance. And pun very much intended, the Game Boy Advance is more advanced hardware-wise than the Super Nintendo, so it gives you a better performant, more interesting look at playing the Super Nintendo original courses. Now I know this isn't going to be for everyone. The original F-Zero and Super Nintendo is one of those 10 out of 10 games that doesn't technically need any improvement whatsoever, but this is just a fun new way to check that game out. And I've always loved Maximum Velocity and the Game Boy Advance look when you're actually scaling around sprites and doing this infinite plane thing on the course compared to some of the Mode 7 stuff on Super Nintendo. And I know how many people out there absolutely love the F-Zero franchise, and honestly Nintendo really isn't doing anything with it whatsoever, so it's awesome to see modders like this come in and do something new with the franchise, because honestly the last big F-Zero game I played and loved was made by Sega, and my opinion is still that the best F-Zero game ever made was made by Sega, but I'm sure that'll generate a few comments, pros and cons in the description down below. But honestly, having all of this over on Game Boy Advance is just a fun time, and that's why I love doing videos on these new mods. You have all of the vehicles, you get all of their data, and you'll see here in just a moment you have the 3 original cups from the Super Nintendo version of the game, and there are more cups as well. I'm just showing you the first 3. There is a hidden 4th once you beat the first 3 cups, and I just again love how this goes over to the Game Boy Advance graphically. It has a completely different colorways profile, and I just think that the graphics absolutely shine here over on the Game Boy Advance. Now obviously in Maximum Velocity the control and handling is slightly different than the Super Nintendo original, so it might take you a minute to get used to this compared to if you've been playing the Super Nintendo version for the last 25 plus years. But that is where the fun lies. You get to learn the game again, you get to see the courses in a new system, and you just get to have more fun. And I really do think Nintendo should do something with F-Zero. They continually give us new Mario Kart tracks, and I get that's a big system seller, but this is one of their most popular franchises that fans continue to ask for new games in the series on, and Nintendo seems to forget the franchise exists outside of F-Zero 99, which while fun was not a new game, and I think pretty much everyone would love to see that new title. But tell me down below what the most fun you've ever had with F-Zero is. For me, it definitely is AX on the GameCube or on the Triforce arcade hardware. But seeing this again on Game Boy Advance, it just has such a nice pastel color profile to it. And a lot of the games on the Game Boy Advance really played around with those pastels, the blues, the purples in the background, even some of the yellows and some of the whites have this off shading tone that just looks amazing on Game Boy Advance hardware. I'm playing this on MiSTerFPGA today and it works perfectly, but you can play this on real hardware or software emulation as well. There's so many different ways to enjoy this. The only wrong way to do it is not check it out in the first place, because this again is just such a celebrational thing. Getting new versions of games you know, love, and remember made by fans just expands the overall library and gives you more fun and a new way to play. And you'll see there, even though I'm not great at F-Zero, I was able to squeak out a first place finish. And because this is the Game Boy Advance, you have the Game Boy Advance sound hardware as well running the soundtrack elements. So go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds or so. I'll come back and talk more about the technical details of the port and why you shouldn't play it. But enjoy it because it is good. Some awesome music right there, and I will honestly say I've always loved the Game Boy Advance and what it sounds like, and in general I would say that the Game Boy Advance is my favorite Nintendo handheld of all time. Don't get me wrong, I've got a Game Boy Color, a DS, 3DS, pretty much anything Nintendo's made handheld wise I do have in my desk drawer somewhere, but the Game Boy Advance, I remember when it came out, I traveled around a lot for work, and I took that thing absolutely everywhere, and I had a copy of this game, obviously the original, not the Super Nintendo track port, in my bag, and I used to play this on planes and airports and on different buses, and I just fell in love with the Game Boy Advance hardware, and that's just kind of how it became my favorite Nintendo handheld. But tell me down below which one is your favorite. And getting new games in 2024 for Game Boy Advance just feels like a really special thing. And I know these things happen relatively often, but I feel like 2024 has been an incredible year for all of these different fan projects. And of course, there are a ton of Nintendo fans and a ton of F-Zero fans out there. They're going to welcome this with open arms. I need to play it more and get better at it because, again, I've always slightly struggled with F-Zero. I'm much better at traditional arcade racers without this kind of drifting mechanic around the corners, how these ships work. But you'll see here as the screen scrolls around, as we have that infinite plane, it just looks absolutely gorgeous when it comes over to the Game Boy Advance. This, you would believe, is just something that Nintendo released back in the day. That is how impressive this port is from the maker. You would have absolutely no idea that this was something done by a fan who was modding the games together versus something that Nintendo sold in a retail package. But let's pick a different cup so we can kind of play around a little bit more with the courses, and you see how they kind of string together, because the courses are done in these same cups and in the same order as the Super Nintendo version. But just take a look at that city skyline going underneath you, all of those lights lighting up. It just looks outstanding on the Game Boy Advance, and here on MiSTerFPGA with the clean HDMI out, you get an incredible way to play this game, but I'm sure it would look just as good on an IPS modded handheld Game Boy Advance, and that's the thing about the original Game Boy Advance and the horizontal form factor. You throw an IPS screen on that thing and you have one of the best looking handhelds of all time. And it's not like we can just do this with F-Zero. As I pinball off the wall here, you can tell I do struggle with this game. There's so many other great Super Nintendo games that could be modded over to Game Boy Advance if somebody worked on them. So tell me down below, what's the one game you would love to see brought over to Game Boy Advance that never was back in the day? I would be curious. But as we move on to the next track here in F-Zero, this is just a fun time. Vintage Velocity takes all the fun, all the charm, and all the courses of the Super Nintendo version and puts them over onto the Game Boy Advance Maximum Velocity engine, and it just works even if I totally got bumped into the wall there and got stuck. That is what happens in F-Zero. Sometimes you just kind of have to hang with it, learn the courses, learn the AI, and try to get better. But the good thing is you now have time to get better because F-Zero Vintage Velocity is here. It brings all of the tracks from the Super Nintendo version into the Game Boy engine, and you can totally just try to drive the wrong way and create chaos if you so wish. But that is the video. Go and download this. I will leave a link to the patch below, but whatever you do, don't skip it. If you're an F-Zero fan, you're going to absolutely love this. Short of that, hope you're having a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. I've exploded and I am done. Bye-bye.